Good morning, everyone. I can see we have 40-ish or so participants, attendees here in this session of the Medical Device Conference, the first ever virtual conference, and this session on wearable medical technology. I'm Lars Oddsson. I'm with RxFunction and also associated with the University of Minnesota in a couple of roles there where I teach and have an adjunct professor position. And I'm excited to be the chair and host of this first virtual version of our session that's been going on now on the wearables for, I believe, 8-9 years. Without further ado, I want to get us quickly started here. We have 5 presenters, and I'm not going to go through in detail their introductions and bios. You can read that on the website. But they represent from the East Coast to the West Coast, R&D activities, IP activities, as well as entrepreneurial activities in the wearable technology space. And I look forward to this presentation by our attendees. We're now over 50 here, so we should get started. And we'll begin with Juliana Chersten, who is with MIT Media Lab. And she's going to talk to us about leveraging electronic textiles in low Earth orbit from sensate skins to sensory conductors. So Juliana, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Lars. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. That look all right?
Yes.
Great. So thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Juliana. I'm a senior PhD student at the MIT Media Lab. And I'd say we might be kicking off with a bit of the wild card presentation of this session because I don't formally work on medical devices or wearables, but there may be interesting application for some of the technology we're developing in the context of wearables. Of course, like to start by thanking my collaborators across different departments at MIT. We work with the Japanese Space Agency as well as manufacturers in the textile industry. So for anyone who's not familiar, my program, the MIT Media Lab, is a bit of the interdisciplinary playground of MIT. There are students coming and researchers coming from a wealth of different backgrounds, also drawing from art, architecture, and design worlds. And we come together and have a strong focus on prototyping concepts and ideas that might influence the future of human experience and human engagement with the world. And the Media Lab has a rich history in working in wearable technology. These are some photos from the 90s showing some of our very early contributions to this, at the time, very bizarre notion that one might actually wear a sensor that was tracking some parameter of the body's function, which at this stage is now a very common paradigm. My research group is the Responsive Environments group, and I understand this video may be playing a bit choppy, but the idea is that my group focuses on distributed sensor network design. And about 20 years ago, we made some early contributions in the idea of dense sensate media, architecting sensor networks on substrates or in these dense node forms. And over the last 20 years, we've been moving increasingly towards conformal dense substrates. So you see, to some extent, you may be able to see, sorry about that. Let me go back. So yeah, you may be able to see the sensor tape project, which I'll just play one more time. Yeah, so dense sensor nodes taking the form of a tape, which is also cuttable. So this is kind of an overview of the area my research group plays in. Now, during the rehearsal, we had some video trouble, so I'm gonna pass the baton over to one of my co-hosts here to play these videos. So this is an example of a colleague of mine, a project from a colleague of mine called Robables. The idea is to have small robots that crawl on the body and track their relative positions on the body and relative to one another, various applications. When Artem, my colleague, designed this project, he had no idea why he was building this. We often at the Media Lab just kind of build things because we think they're thought-provoking or might inspire. And indeed, if you switch to the next video, Artem was approached by medical professionals who thought there might be interesting medical application if the robot could crawl directly on the skin. So Artem went on to then develop a robot that could crawl on the skin, could do skin imaging, also look for abnormal growths on the skin via kind of a pinching mechanism. So this is often how we work in my research group and at the lab. We don't know why we're doing something, but then we make interesting connections and discover that something we built is useful. And perhaps something similar might happen in the case of my work today. So I'm going to go ahead and take screen control back. All right, so getting into my own work. So we're working to bring electronic textile technology to space for the first time. I work at the intersection of aerospace engineering, electrical engineering, and sensor network design. Although I'll be talking about aerospace context, I know the audience probably is not coming from the world of aerospace engineering. So I think the paradigms, at least conceptually, would apply for extreme environment exploration and well-being on Earth, what be that deep sea diving, Arctic exploration, even casts for medical casts and firefighters. But in the context of aerospace, aerospace textiles have decades of heritage for protecting both the astronaut and the astronaut's habitat from the harsh elements of space. So this is a little known fact that the white color of the space station that you may have seen in photos is actually a woven textile material. And the question that my research addresses is, this material has been passive for decades, despite all of the advances in the electronic textile design. So how might we actually leverage this large space exposed surface area for sensing purpose, both in service of scientific inquiry, but also to better address the well-being of the wearer and the explorer, and maybe also their direct ability to sense the environment while also simultaneously remaining protected from it. So skins have, as I mentioned, have a long history in space. Many are thin films, but textiles certainly make an appearance. And increasingly, as a side note, the world of aerospace engineering has been moving towards these thin, membrane-like, large area deployables because they have advantages when it comes to optimizing mass and volume of launch. Of the launch structure. It's very expensive to launch large, massive structures. So you get solar sails that will help with propulsion, and star shades that block background light for telescopes, inflatable habitats. So this is where the world of aerospace engineering is moving. And now the question is, what can we do? What sort of affordances can we build in for the health and well-being of the explorer? Now, these materials were not chosen randomly. The space environment is very harsh. You experience, for instance, atomic oxygen erosion of materials. The space dust environment in low Earth orbit is unfortunately very polluted, not only with micrometeorites, but also with man-made orbital debris accumulated over the last decades. And even the fabrics that we design expressively to protect the astronaut or the habitat often undergo degradation due to erosion or to impact. So it's quite harsh. At the same time, I mentioned impact. As recently as 2018, astronauts detected a hole, like an air leak in the space station. And their solution for attempting to locate this hole was to peer out of the little window, the little cupola of the space station with binoculars and zoom lenses looking for that hole. So technology, this is kind of the state of the art when it comes to impact detection in particular. From a scientific perspective, there's a lot of interest in micrometeorite detection that is sub-millimeter in size, because these little particles can't be tracked by radar, but pose a significant risk to space explorers. So what we're doing is drawing a bridge between the latest advances in functional fibers And we're doing this, at least in our initial prototypes, by integrating new piezoelectric fibers. So you can't buy piezoelectric fibers commercially, but we are modifying a commercial product, and we're also working with a material science department. They've yet to publish their work, but they've used thermal drawing technique to produce piezo fibers as well. So this is really kind of at the cutting edge of what's possible in terms of manufacturing. So we're taking these fibers, we're integrating them sparsely into materials that have decades of flight heritage, in this case, Teflon impregnated fiberglass. I'm coming from more of an electronics and signal processing lab, so we put a lot of emphasis on ultra low power readout and really optimizing the system for resource constrained operation. And you probably can't see these videos very well, so I'll just talk through them, but you're just seeing a little swatch of material with a sensor in it that can respond to my touch, showing that, you know, maybe one day these whole large area surfaces would be similarly responsive, both on the body and on the habitat. Our goal, again, just to ground the work in an initial application, is to detect and characterize debris and micrometeorite impactors. So one tool we're using is called the Lipit facility at the Keith Nelson group at MIT, shoots tiny 10 micron scale particles at kilometers per second at targets, and it lets us simulate the environment of space. So again, this video may look a little choppy, but what you're seeing is these particles moving at hundreds of meters per second with a high-speed camera, hitting this black area, which is my fabric, and you may be seeing resulting signal readout from our sensor system. So we're showing that the sensor is in fact sensitive enough to detect these extremely tiny events, these tiny particles. Maybe more interestingly to this audience, I think this material and this paradigm for design where you balance the protective and sensing properties of the material could have very interesting application areas for the well-being and health of explorers. One conceptual example we've been working on is a simple haptics concept where you take the skin that is resilient to the extreme environment, whatever that is, and you make it sensitive. And you take whatever data it feels, and we call it like a sensory conductor. You conduct that sensory information to the biological skin of the astronaut that cannot tolerate the environment. So it provides a good reason, a good explanation for why the textile is important. It's robust, but we're connecting that second skin to the wearer's biological skin, and what sorts of yeah, I hope on the one hand that this would help to bring the wearer closer to the environment they're exploring. That's why we explore. But I would also imagine potentially some medical benefit to this type of concept. Maybe also for various targets of exploration on Earth. So I think I may have a couple more minutes. So for anybody in the audience who's interested, I'm just going to provide some brief additional technical details. So this is a zoom in of one of our piezo fiber designs, the one that's publicly available knowledge at this point. So you have these internal copper wires. We've also played with yarns, PVDF TRF layer, and elastomeric ink coating to form the piezo composite structure. These are some zooms of various fabric substrates with integrated sensors that we've developed. And they, on the one hand, we want to mimic NASA's space qualified products closely. But on the other hand, we have to balance these protective benefits with the requirements of our sensor system. So this is where the design challenge becomes interesting. These are some examples of the types of data we see coming out of our impact detector, our impact experiments. What I'm showing here is that there are these different kind of clusters and forms that the signal takes. And one theory we have for this, and you're seeing some microscope images here of these little 30 micron steel particles after we've subjected our material to impact. So sometimes the impactor strikes the fabric, sometimes it strikes a warp thread on the sensor, and sometimes it recoils off of the sensor directly in these little crater. So our theory right now is that the different classes of impact signatures we see help us distinguish where exactly the impactor hit. One exciting note is that in September, we'll be launching a suite of these samples to the International Space Station's outer walls, a kind of an exposure facility for testing. So this is a picture of a sample holder. So it's small, it's 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And it includes many layers. Some of our electronics are flying as well. And we're flying swatches of different material types. And for 1 year, these materials will be exposed to the space environment. They'll come back to Earth. We'll analyze the resilience of the material to space. And we'll also see how the sensor performance holds up. So I know I have to wrap up pretty soon. A lot goes into preparing for launch. This is a picture of our vibration and shock testing out at MIT Lincoln Laboratory as an example. And I'm gonna probably skip over this last part, but just to give you a small idea of where we're headed. I'm gonna be focusing, starting now for the remainder of my degree, on attention models for these skins. Just like our biological skin, if you're in a resource constrained environment, it could be advantageous if you could allocate your resources, your compute, your channel latency, optimizing the properties of your sensor network for the region of the skin where you expect interesting data to occur. And this is especially important for a skin where your satellite or your human might be moving around. So you're constantly changing where the location of interest. The toy example is that if you have a cube covered in skin, and you're interested in one particular orientation of sensing, then as you rotate that cube around, you want to keep your resources on the face of the cube that's pointed in the direction of interest. So I think I'll wrap up now. I have some ideas for where this field of sensate media or electronic skin design is going. So feel free to ask me more questions about where the field is going. But otherwise, I thank you for your time. And please feel free to reach out to me with unexpected use cases for this type of technology in the world of medical device design. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliana. That was great. Some very exciting things going on there. I knew it. Any questions that participants that you have out there? I see we're reaching almost 100 here. Great, very exciting.
I'll just mention in closing that to thank Lars. We met at a NASA conference early this year, and it was a pleasure to thank you for inviting me to this. Venue.
Of course, you're welcome. So if you have questions for Juliana, there's one coming up here. Can you comment on the state of pressure sensitive textiles in terms of sensitivity and power efficiency?
In terms of sensitivity and power efficiency, yeah. So we kind of the benchmark that we've set is that at least for our impactors, which have on a scale of millijoules of energy, we are able to detect those impactors even when they are striking the textile at a 2 centimeter offset relative to our sensor. So I hope that gives you some feeling for at least the vibration sensitivity. It's quite good as long as you are able to control your noise environment. That's often a sticking point. And yeah, in terms of pressure sensing, I haven't worked as directly with pressure sensors, but piezo-resistive sensors, I'm using piezoelectric sensors, but piezo-resistive sensors are quite common as well. Can't give you quite as precise a benchmark for piezo-resistive sensors.
Thank you. So that question was from Stefan Madan Singh. One more question here. How feasible would the capture of a non-mechanical energy be with this or similar technologies? That's from David Nedrillo.
Yeah, so some of my colleagues in the material science department are interested in this type of fabric for acoustic measurements, maybe even acoustic measurement on the body, for instance, like heart rate capture, lung, with everything going on currently, there's more interest in establishing metrics for lung, healthy lung function. So acoustic measurements are definitely viable, and we're actively testing in that area. Otherwise, maybe you have something specific in mind besides mechanical or acoustic transduction. Those are the areas I've thought about. Okay.
Well, thank you, Juliana. Other questions that might not get answered on time, please follow up directly with Juliana. You have her email here, chairston@mit.edu. And if we have some time over at the end and interest in staying online, we can maybe follow up then as well. But thanks so much, Juliana. Next, we're going to go to Chicago. Chandra with Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, the famous RIC previously, now Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And he's going to talk to us about wearable technologies for clinical rehabilitation and outcome. So please, Chandra, take control of the screen, and look forward to your presentation.
Is it visible?
Yes, you're on. Looks great.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. A very good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the conference organizers for giving me this opportunity, and also all of you for taking time to attend this session. I'm a research associate at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in Chicago. I finished my PhD in industrial engineering, and I moved here 3 years ago. So I've been here for 3 years. So today we will talk about some of my research here with wearable technologies for clinical rehab and outcome. So before that, I would like to give a quick intro to Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. It was formerly known as the Rehab Institute of Chicago. And we moved to this new facility in 2017, March 2017. So the new facility is a new model of care where we have research and patient care going side by side on the same floor. So we researchers sit among where patient care is done, so that the entire research process is participatory and patient can also be involved in the research process. So we have more than 250 inpatient beds now, and the total research space is 800,000 square feet. And we have 5 main labs, which is it's divided by the body part, like the brain, spinal cord, nerve, pediatric, and cancer. And then the labs are called as the five ability labs that you can see that are listed. So within the Ability Lab, I work under Max Snyder Center for Rehabilitation. So some of the key kind of research projects we handle are mainly with externally powered exoskeletons, assistive technologies. We also have, in the past few years, we have gone into more wearable sensing and real-time patient monitoring. We have also gone to data analytics, and then now we also combine them to come up with new therapies and outcomes. So I would put it as we validate technology. We also generate big data and analytics using wearable sensors, and we also innovate new therapies and outcomes based on these. So just to give you an idea of the plethora of projects currently, clinical trials which are running with us. So you can see that we have almost been working with most of the exoskeletons which is available. So if you see, for instance, the EXO and the Indigo and the Rewalk, which some of you may already know, are more of whole body exoskeletons. Then the Kyogo is like a soft exoskeleton, and the Harvard is a soft exosuit. We also work with prosthetic technologies, and we also have the Honda is a modular hip exoskeleton, which is more suited for stroke rehab and as well as otherwise healthy aging individuals. And we also have other sensor-based studies where we look at falls based on smartphone data, or we also look at high-resolution like heart rate data and physiologic data using like flexible sensors and stuff. So this is a whole composite of kind of clinical trials we run, just to give you guys an idea. But today's talk, I would focus on one single project from this, which is a powered prosthetic leg, to just give you a flavor of how we design studies and what we do. So the validation landscape for us is depends on basically on what projects we get. For instance, there might be some projects where people might come with a technology or a device, and they would say we actually have built it, but we actually don't know where this would be useful clinically, and then we help them find what impairment type that is suitable for, whether it's suitable for a chronic or an acute, or whether it's suited for like a therapy or a home use. And this is one kind of projects we deal with. The next one is there are some projects which actually come during the design iterative phase, where people have a very crude prototype, which is a very initial prototype, but then they would want to use it on research participants, and then they would want to improvise the design in terms of power generation, signal quality, or in terms of getting the kind of feedback. So that is a different layer of projects we do. And the third one is a main one, where which is for finished products, where the products are already like near a human trial, already at a human trial stage, and then we do safety and efficacy evaluations for these kind of devices, and we also look at the usability and user interaction, machine interaction for these. So the project I'll talk today is one such project where we determine the efficacy of externally powered prosthetic device. So it's a powered knee ankle prosthesis, and it is basically used by people with above knee amputees. So this is a clinical trial which is being conducted with collaboration with Wearable University, who designed the device. Shelley Ryan is actually we are leading the clinical trial, and then for the other side, which is there's a Department of Defense, Walter Reed. This clinical trial is it's a trial where we are trying to ascertain the safety and efficacy of this device, both in civilian population as well as the active duty population. So we wanted to see how this technology is kind of benefiting different population. And this is a research prototype. It's not like it's not an approved device yet. So it has an IDE. So it's a research prototype device. So it's allowed to run a human trial using this. So a quick basic about amputation for people who might be new to this. So I'm just going to run through the slide. There are more than about 40% of the amputation are lower extremity, and broadly there are two lower extremity amputation types. One is above knee and one is below knee, and there are subcategories too. But today we will be focusing on transfemoral amputation, which means the amputation is above the knee. So when the amputation is above the knee, when we give a prosthetic device, the device will have both knee and ankle joint in them. So there are a lot of state-of-art devices for this. So people have used passive devices, which are basically, they don't have any external power, but then they draw power from the user in terms of springs or pneumatic controls. And then we have active devices which give external power supply. They have motors to create torque. And then the third one is a research prototype. We'll look at it, which we will look at today. The difference is this. So the research prototype which we are looking at is, it's the first device which has both power at the knee and the ankle, and the knee and the ankle, they talk to each other. So the existing devices in the market, they can do either power at the knee or power at the ankle, and you can still combine them, but then there will be like two different manufacturers. So, but there is only one device which actually has the entire system, and this is a research prototype device from Wearable University, which we are testing. And before I move to the next slide, I actually wanted to make a point about what is the value proposition for having a powered device. So, so having passive device reduces, increases the energy expenditure. People feel tired sooner when they walk. It's also not stable, and one of the biggest problem is using a passive device actually has been shown to have asymmetric gait, which means that when the sound side versus the prosthetic side, the gait is very asymmetric. So what happens is, over longer run, this leads to secondary musculoskeletal issues like low back pain in the lumbar region, which kind of reduces their independence and activity. So so people are slowly moving towards power technology to kind of get a symmetric activation, and also enhance the performance of people using prosthetic device. So so I wanted to, before we designed the study, I wanted to, what we did was we looked, you can see the picture of the prosthetic device on the left side. And so many of these devices, what happens is they come from universities and labs, where it's probably a PhD student's project or something like that, and then it comes in a very research prototype stage, and then from the phase where it's a research prototype to where it goes to commercialization, there's a gap, and this is where we fill in. We take these products which are research prototype, we give it to patients, we get feedback, we give feedback to the designer to improve the design, and then we put them through a clinical trial and bring them to the point where they could get FDA approval. So that's in a nutshell what we do. So, but the key is to actually have some idea of how much this gap is, because if you take longer time than this gap, the commercialization phase is going to be missed, and then the next generation might come. So you have to be very careful about designing your study based on your assessment about how much this gap is. And the next thing that is important is within this gap, we have to basically choose the clinical test and the validation based on what the purpose of the product, like who are the patients, and what kind of functional activities this would cover, and what is the safest load it can take, and what are the terrains it can walk, things like that. And then we have to also look into aspects like, are we going to do all evaluations only indoors in the clinic, or we are going to do outdoors and do it in real world as well. And then one other aspect is eventually all medical devices, when they go into commercialization phase, one of the main thing is reimbursement. And if you want to see how you will do an assessment which would qualify for reimbursement, to show proofs for reimbursement, and will also help in terms of FDA approval. So these are the aspects which we mainly consider when we design a clinical trial for a medical device. And in the next slide, I'll just show you how we designed it for this particular prosthetic leg, and then which so for this particular one, it was a randomized clinical trial. We had ABBA testing, and we had 14 civilians and 3 active duty soldiers who participated in the study. And this is the first time where we used the same, this is the first time in the literature where the same device is actually used in both civilian and military, and then we are teasing out the difference to see whether this leg is more beneficial to one population versus other. And then we did a very comprehensive design of assessment. What we did was we did the usual clinical test, and we also made sure that the tuning was made personalized, and then we did both indoor and outdoor assessment. Outdoor is in real life, where I'll show you some videos. And one very unique thing we did in this was, no matter what our research proof is shown, even if the device is beneficial, if the insurance does not approve it, the technology is not going to actually translate to the end user, because the insurance wouldn't cover it. So what we did was, we did a slide of reverse engineering in this, and we went and we looked at the criteria for which insurance would cover the device, the list of assessment and what are needed. And then we incorporated those clinical test and those guidelines into a clinical trial from the initial phase, so that the translation is easier. And this is a very novel part which we tried, and it has been really effective, and it's, I think, gaining really good feedback on that. So, and this is a very quick slide where I just wanted to show that this is the interface for the device, and this is the state machine where you have 3 states. This is a state machine where we have 3 states, and I wanted to show that the video in the top corner shows that initially when we're trying to tune the device, you would see that the participant is actually not walking properly. The foot is actually striking the ground, and then once we tune it, once we do fine tuning, then you can see that when they walk on the treadmill, they are actually really walking very good. So this is a tuning process which happens during this is the basic of the tuning process, and we change these parameters to get it. I'm going to so these are some of the tests we did, and this is an outdoor training where we actually trained in the real life situation for this participant, and this is called as a modified crosswalk test to see if the device actually is performing safely in a crosswalk. And this is also, the other is like an outdoor test where we walked in different terrains and surfaces. And we also walked in very uneven surfaces like pebbles. So if you see, yeah. So I'm running short of time. I'm going to kind of show you the results quickly. So what happened? So once we train and then we have the participant proficient in the devices, we actually collected biomechanics data where we looked at the EMG for the low back muscles and also the ground reaction forces. So here this plot shows Genium and Rio are two prosthetic devices, and the HC is a healthy control. So the takeaway point from this is, if you see the bottom plot, you see that the low back lumbar muscle activation is symmetric when they use the powered leg versus they use their own predicate device, which is the Genium or the Rio. So this is the first proof that they are actually having symmetric muscle activation. And in the top plot, you would see that the ground reaction force is also symmetric and closer to healthy controls when compared to their predicate device, which is a passive mechanical knee. And then this is a comparison for the energy expenditure, which is a treadmill walking. So this is energy expenditure where the participant walked on a treadmill, and we collected the Cosman data, and we found that the powered leg was actually more efficient than the predicate device, and we found similar trend even in the active duty participants from the military. And so, in summary, what I would like to bring is as per the for the powered leg, the test was that the powered leg is actually helpful in minimizing this low back strain and leading to symmetric muscle activation. It led to normalized gait, and there was a personalized benefit in energy expenditure and endurance. And the take-home message is we have to have comprehensive clinical trials, which includes real-world reimbursement as well as personal specific assessments. And employing wearable devices based evaluation is in both clinical and real-time assessment is very beneficial. And the most important point is a timeline of the technology where we have to be aware of how much this gap is to kind of finish the clinical trial testing and get the device approved before, so that we don't miss the window for the commercialization phase. And this gap varies for different technologies depending on sensors. For wearable sensors, this gap is very narrow, and then we have to design the study slightly differently. While for robotics and prosthetic, this gap may be a little higher because of the way the field is, the technology evolves. And for a medical app, like your smartphone app, this gap is narrow as well. So to get FDA approval, you have to keep this gap in mind to design studies. And I would like to acknowledge our collaborators. And then the study was funded by the Department of Defense since 2014. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. Very exciting work there, and that gap is a very important one to try to bridge.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying, that's very challenging, and it's exciting to learn that institutions are stepping in to try to fill that gap, because it's a very important one if we want these technologies that we learn about and see and hear about in the academic R&D realm should ever reach the customers out there and the patients out there in need. Thanks again very much. Do we have any questions here for Chandra? We have maybe time for one. I noticed that we reached 100 participants. Thank you, everyone. That's great. That must be a milestone. That's filling up a sizable room at the typical conference we have. So that's exciting. I think in interest of time, we'll move along here to Jim. And Jim is going to talk to us about the IP in the wearable space. And his title of his presentation is Using Intellectual Property Research for the Assessment of Medical Wearables, Competitive Landscape and Technological Strategy. Jim, I see you there. Please take the screen and look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, how's that? Wait, full screen? There we go. Okay.
There we go. Very good.
So yes, my presentation is on using intellectual property research to gain some insight into competitive landscapes and technology strategies. For today's presentation, I've prepared 3 different landscapes focused on medical wearables, but certainly don't take anything I'm saying today as precise legal advice or as a substitute for consulting your own legal experts. Here's just an overview of my presentation. I really have 8 slides that I'm going to focus on. And I want to outline the process that I use to create these landscapes, and in particular what I've done for the medical device wearables landscapes that I've created for this presentation. And then just run through some of the results in terms of assignees, inventors, the patent literature citations, and then some of the analysis of the CPC codes as well. And I'll conclude actually with just a list there of what else is possible beyond that. So this is the process that I've used for today's presentation. In particular, the landscapes I'm presenting today are really patent landscapes. So patents are a subset really of intellectual property overall, right? And the presentations I have here, the landscapes I've done today are all patent landscapes on the medical wearables area. But you know, more and more I'm asked to include other intellectual property resources in some of these analyses. For example, like in the medical area, I'm often asked to include PubMed and other resources into these sort of projects. One of the great things about this area of using intellectual property research is it's evolving very nicely along with our whole I guess API connected internet world, and that there are all sorts of resources out there that you can tap in, and more of those resources are becoming available via a programmatic interface, an API of some sort, and it really facilitates a nice integration with many modern data science platforms. Everything I do here is all Python in Jupyter notebooks, and for example, I'm using Google's BigQuery data warehouse and the patent data sets that are provided through BigQuery, and that's all done through an API right into BigQuery. But the diagram here shows the process that I use for creating these landscapes. Essentially, we create a patent documents domain collection. Actually, we intelligently create a patent documents domain collection, and then we analyze that domain collection based on assignees, inventors, citations, and class codes, and we can derive information about the competitive landscape, you know, kind of the key technology experts, notable prior art, and then we can analyze the class codes and get some idea as to the technologies that are applied to our domain collection. So the first step is really creating the domain collection, and there are a lot of different ways to do this. The first link on this page actually goes to a report on my website where I kind of summarize the various techniques that I use, and you can get different results based on how you create your initial domain collection, and that's why I think it's important to have a lot of this, you know, automated, you know, easy to run. You can almost do some of these landscaping things in a very iterative sort of fashion these days with various domain collection creation techniques, and then, you know, compare results and really get a better view of the intellectual property landscape that way. But for this presentation, I've actually prepared 3 different landscapes and 3 different reports, one based on keywords, one based on company names, and one based on Google's similar patents. And the links to those 3 reports are right there. So if you want further information, hit those links and it'll take you to my website for those full reports. But for the keywords, this is simply a process of you know, intelligently choosing some keywords and then matching those keywords across the title, abstract, description, and claims, and pulling those patent documents into the domain collection for analysis. For this presentation, I've used Wearable Medical and Wearable Health as the kind of the combination keywords. That actually creates a very, very broad patent landscape for that domain collection. You know, you change the words and you can create narrower domain collections and get, you know, different results. In the assignee names and company names area, if you have a list of company names, you can use those to match assignee names and pull in all of the patent documents that those companies have filed. And as a result of that, you can kind of create a domain collection based on a sector of competitors. And so what I did here was I came up with a list of companies that were that I thought represented the medical wearables sector pretty well, and used that as the base there. Now, so Google actually does a pretty good job of providing a lot of information here, and they've gone off with a machine learning model and have created a database within BigQuery that lists the top 25 patent documents that are the most similar to all the other patent documents in its patents data set. And so that really applies kind of across the sort of 100 million patents that they have in their patents data set. And so what I've done here is I used the company names domain collection, and then I went off and I found the 25 most similar patents to all of those patents, and used that as a domain collection for that similars domain collection. So the first thing I like to do when I'm starting off an analysis like this is just get an idea of how the market's evolved. And I do that by plotting the patent applications filings, the number of patent applications filed on a quarterly basis. So this bar chart here actually comes from the keywords domain collection, and you can see that there's a patent that was filed way back here in Q4 of 1979. But by and large, the market really has evolved since Q3 of 2013. So medical wearables, at least from an intellectual property standpoint, is really kind of a nearer term phenomenon in the last 7 years. Here's an example of the top assignees list, and this really gives us insight into the competitive landscape. So this is simply a tabulation of the number of patent applications on an assignee basis. And if you're involved in this medical wearables market, you may recognize some of these names. Zoll Medical, actually, they pretty much, no matter how you slice the domain collection, they appear in the top of these companies. Cardiac pacemakers is actually part of Boston Scientific today. Valencell, they compete in this kind of lower level technology wearable sensor area. You see IBM on here. IBM is really not in this sector, right? But they, in a broad domain collection like this, IBM almost always shows up in one way or another. They are, if you don't know this already, they are the most prolific patent filing company in the entire country, and have been for about 25 years. And they're very good at this, and they're very good at articulating various embodiments of their inventions that span a wide variety of technology sectors. But you also see companies like Magic Leap on here as well. So Magic Leap is in this augmented reality area, so they're really not in medical wearables, but a lot of their patents do pertain and call out medical wearable embodiments of their inventions. But overall, this gives you a pretty good idea of the competitive landscape. You'll even see some individuals on here as well, based on how patents are assigned, cross-assigned between companies and individuals, or just assigned to individuals. Here's an inventors list. This is very similar to the previous list. It tabulates the patent applications based on inventors, but also provides the company to which these inventors have provided or have assigned most of their intellectual property, or the patents, the patent applications. So this essentially gives you the kind of the key tech experts in the sector and the companies that they work for. Here's an example of the patent literature citations table. So, and this is a tabulation of the references of the patent documents in the domain collection, right? So this list here, these patent documents are not necessarily in the domain collection. They could be, but they're not necessarily. They are the references of the that are called out on the patents in the domain collection. So this can give you a really good idea if there are certain patents or a group of patents that are frequently called out across a domain collection. That's going to tell you that that's an important set of patents and intellectual property for your technology area. In a broad domain collection like this, you usually find that the citations are kind of spread out across a number of them. On the full report on the website, I think I list the top 250 of these these citations. And the other way that I listed on the full report is that I also categorize them by, I categorize the citations by assignee. You group them by assignee. So you can get an idea of the companies that have the most important citations portfolios, right? And that can be important actually often in litigation situations. But this can be a good starting point for prior art analysis as well. So here's the just one table I have on CPC code analysis. This can really get complex, and you can go deep in analyzing these things. CPC codes. So every patent application is applied one or more CPC codes when it's submitted. And they're divided up into inventive CPC codes that represent the inventive ideas and other areas that the patent may intersect. But the first 4 characters of the CPC code is what's called the group code. And when you start combining the group codes with the group code titles, you can get an idea of the technologies that are applied to the domain collection and the extent to which the various areas are, the various technologies are applied. So A61B here is the diagnosis, surgery, and identification segment, and that's really the most popular one, to the tune of about 20% of the domain collection. But other areas, healthcare informatics, you can see nearly 8%. Wireless is down, it's kind of 3%. It drops off pretty quick in the technology areas. You can also, so in my reports, the full reports, I go one layer deeper into the group code numbers as well. And there are various other layers below these that you can dig into, and it can get quite complex. Usually when we're digging into these CPC codes, it's more of a customized project kind of basis. But as an overview, this can give you a pretty good idea of the technologies that are applied to the domain collection. This is really my last chart here, and it's kind of an interesting one that I put together. It's a heat map timeline of the CPC codes. So you kind of have to jump back and forth a little bit between this one and the previous chart, but this lists the top 10 CPC codes with the top CPC code at the bottom and number 10 at the top, and it shows you a heat map of the intensity of the level of patent filings that fall into that CPC code. So essentially what this gives you is it gives you a timeline of the technology evolution. So for example, it's really here, the Q3 of 2016 is the peak filing, but you see like this G16H area really kind of spiked in this third quarter of 2016. G16H, that's our healthcare informatics area, right? So this can give you a pictorial representation of the evolution of the technology timing, and can really get interesting. I think it gets more interesting the narrower you define your domain collection. And that's pretty much it. There are a lot of other ways that you can do patent landscaping, and you can combine them with other intellectual property resources as well. But I'll wrap it up at that right here, and if there are any questions, I'll take them now.
Thanks, Jim. Very interesting. That's a new way of looking at IP. That looked like a landscape even. your heat map there, it was like a mountain. Very intriguing. The first question here is from Nilab Narayan. Is the presentation available somewhere to try these links?
I think we're going to try and make it available, or we're going to put the links in our bios on the University of Minnesota conference website. But I will, depending on what we want to do here, I can make this whole presentation available on my website as well. It shouldn't be, so it's really easy to find this stuff on my website. If you just go to Moeller Ventures and then hit the intellectual property link. Right now, the 3 reports for the University of Minnesota, this presentation are the top 3 in there.
So a question from me here. Can this in any way be sort of tied into commercialization activities that you see sort of these over time in your landscape, and some time delay after that, sort of what Chandra was referring to, you begin to see commercialization activities in those spaces. Or is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, I think if you can, yeah, it's a good point, I think, because there's if you're smart in how you're handling your intellectual property, right, you're filing these things, you're filing at least a provisional when you really have the idea, and then you're year later you're filing the real patent, the non-provisional application, and that's going to precede probably your commercialization by maybe even some number of years. But if you have the data points on sort of the commercialization activity, you can plot these things out. I think that's it touches in this whole area of combining these sorts of resources with other sorts of resources. Well, maybe it's even market news on that you're scanning for certain keywords and things that you could begin to plot out some of the commercialization activity.
Yeah, maybe it even ties into the Gartner's hype curve and things like that. You see how things might evolve. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Jim. We're going to move on to Alex, who is with Cala Health. And we're moving then into the commercialization and entrepreneurial activities related to technologies that actually come out of academia. And Alex, he's going to share the Cala Health journey and the story of Cala Health. Thanks for being here, Alex. I see you've taken the screen. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Lars, for the invitation to talk with you today. Does the slide look okay on your screen, Lars? Does the presentation look okay? Great.
Absolutely, perfect.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Kent. I'm Director of Applied Research at Cala Health, which is a medical device startup company located in the Bay Area. And the focus of my talk today is on the Cala Health journey, where I'll discuss the development and commercialization of a wearable neuromodulation therapy. So I first just want to talk about a needs-based, patient-focused innovation framework that Cala Health has been using actually from the very beginning and prior to the founding of the company. And this framework is centered on asking why, what, and how. And so when we talk about why, it's really asking sort of what are the needs of the stakeholders that we're aiming to serve. And so actually when the founding team was including Kate Rosenbluth, who was part of the Stanford Biodesign program, before they ever actually started doing any inventing, they were in the hospital observing and trying to identify needs that were unmet. And in particular, the team was inspired by seeing how patients with a certain neurological disorder called essential tremor struggled to do many of the tasks that many of us take for granted. And these patients were seeking an alternative to the standard of care. And so once the needs have been identified and screened down, that's when we as a company and what the founding team did, moving to the what question, which is, what can we do to address those needs? And really going through brainstorming and inventing new concepts, and then evaluating and screening those concepts to focus on those that are most feasible and that resonate with the stakeholders. In this case, that would resonate with the patients. And finally, we ask how can we implement this and deliver a solution? And as you'll see, Cala developed a patient-centric care model that really fits into patients' lives. So I'll talk through that. So getting into more specifics, essential tremor, which is the disease that we're focused on treating today, is a major unmet need. So it is the most common movement disorder in the US. 7 million Americans have essential tremor. It's 8 times more common than Parkinson's disease. And it's typically characterized by an action tremor, meaning that when someone tries to perform an action or do a movement, the tremor becomes worse. And this, as you'll see in the video on the next slide, has a pretty profound impact on patients' ability to do daily tasks. And in addition to that, there's a gap in the therapeutic options that existed. There are medications for essential tremor that exist, like propranolol and primidone. These are generally ineffective for many patients, and they also have fairly significant side effects. And at the other end of the spectrum, there is deep brain stimulation, which is highly effective, but it requires an invasive brain surgery in which an electrode is implanted into the brain. And so because of this gap in therapeutic options, many patients with essential tremor were insufficiently treated. And the result was comorbidities like depression and anxiety, also impacts on lifestyle, the ability to do work and be independent. So there was a clear patient need that existed. And you can see in this video, hopefully it's not too choppy on your end, you can see that doing things like just holding a cup of coffee or using utensils, the tremor makes doing all of these tasks more difficult, working on a laptop or answering a phone. When the founding team was trying to come up with a solution to this sort of therapeutic gap, they had to fight against an initial instinct of, let's just develop better drugs, or let's just develop safer deep brain stimulation surgeries. And so their concepts that they were inventing to address this unmet need were focused on, initially on a very targeted drug delivery system that would hit just the right spot of the brain that was generating these tremors. But it turns out that biology has already solved this problem of a targeted drug delivery system within the nervous system. And this nervous system is essentially a system of wires between the periphery where the tremor occurs and the brain where the tremor originates. And the team studied various therapeutic modalities before focusing on an electrical therapy. And in this therapy, electrical stimulation is delivered to nerves in the wrist. There are two nerves that are targeted, the median nerve and the radial nerve. And this generates signals that propagate up towards the brain and have been shown to modulate activity in an area of the brain called the ventral intermediate nucleus of the thalamus, which just so happens to be the same location that deep brain stimulation electrodes are placed for treatment of essential tremor. So this is an alternating pattern delivered to these two nerves. And because with this phenomenon, we can really modulate the central brain networks by tapping into these peripheral access points at the wrist. So Cala Health developed a wearable neuromodulation device for treatment of hand tremors. As I mentioned before, this uses electricity as a medicine. So it's delivering stimulation through the skin to activate the nerves in the wrist. You can see a patient wearing the device on the right, and the device is sitting in the charger in the image in the bottom left. The device was designed to be light enough and small enough to be worn all day, like a smartwatch would be. There are onboard sensors on the device that measure the tremor in the real world. And as I'll talk about in a little bit, this allows us both to individualize the stimulation for the patient's tremor, and we can also collect tremor motion data and observe how effective each stimulation session is, and do big data analytics using the cloud connectivity between the device and the cloud to upload and analyze that data. The device is available by physician prescription in the US, and I'll talk about this a little more later, but we try to make it very easy to access therapy by directly shipping the device to patients' homes. The device received de novo marketing authorization from the FDA in 2018. And in 2019, Cala Health completed the largest study of a treatment in essential tremor, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And finally, the device was launched commercially in late 2019. So in the development of this device, we really leveraged two different industries which had made very profound developments over the decades. We leveraged the electrical medicine industry, which started with pacemakers in the 60s, moved to cochlear implants in the 80s, sacral nerve stimulation in the 90s, and deep brain stimulation in the 2000s. And in addition, there are many other implantable electrical devices on the market today. And in addition, there was profound developments in the computing industry, as everyone knows, moving from these large mainframes in the 60s to personal computers, then smartphones, then smartwatches. And we sort of leveraged the developments in both of these fields to go from just a whiteboard concept to market in a short period of time. So I mentioned before that the Cala Trio is individualized to each patient's tremor. And what that means is when the device is first worn by the patient, they'll perform a calibration in which they hold up their arms up and perform a 30-second tremor-inducing postural hold. And the tremor frequency, the dominant tremor frequency is measured. And it turns out that there's some variation in the frequency that the tremor will oscillate in the arms, and it can be different from patient to patient. And so the stimulation frequencies that are delivered to the nerves are actually based on the tremor frequency themselves to try to optimize the therapy. In addition to that, the device is intended to provide on-demand stimulation to give patients the flexibility of receiving tremor relief when and where they need it. So this video shows for an individual patient the effect of stimulation and is showing pre-treatment on the left and post-treatment after a 40-minute therapy session on the right. And you can see that after this 40-minute stimulation session, this patient has received very good, although temporary, relief of their hand tremor with treatment of the Cala Trio. And we're not completely eliminating the tremor, but it's substantially reduced to allow for typical activities of daily living. So this is results from one patient. I mentioned before that we completed a large clinical study. This enrolled 263 patients across 26 sites in the US, and patients used the Cala Trio for 3 months at home. And overall, what the study showed is significant improvements in physician-rated tremor scores, improvements in patient-rated activities of daily living scores, and improvements in the aggregated tremor measurements that we can receive from the device. And specifically what this plot is showing is for all of the patients who completed the study, each individual patient is sort of listed along the x-axis here. And the y-axis is showing the improvement ratio in tremor power. So a value of 1 means on the median, an individual patient didn't see any improvement or decline in tremor after stimulation session. A value of 2 would indicate that a patient saw 50% reduction in tremor from pre to post stimulation on the median. And what these results show is, so there's a variation in how much tremor relief patients get, but 92% of patients showed some improvement on the median. That is, they had a improvement ratio above 1. 54% of patients had at least a 50% reduction in tremor power. And a quarter of patients had a very strong improvement with a 70% reduction in tremor power. And in this study, patients also mentioned that they found the device convenient and easy to use, and the effective therapy was long lasting. So after each stimulation session is completed, on average, patients receive tremor relief for 97 minutes after the stimulation session. One benefit of non-invasive neurostimulation as compared to sort of implantable neurostimulation is we can perform very rapid and capital efficient clinical translation and product development and go from a benchtop concept to where we can test very quickly a new feature, for example, to a clinical trial grade stimulator to a commercial device relatively quickly. And my current focus at Cala right now is on conceptualizing and developing therapy improvements that maximize patients' tremor reduction and improving their overall experience with the device itself. So for example, how can we target the peripheral nerves that we're targeting? How can we target those in a way that's most comfortable for patients? And in addition, what are the specific stimulation parameters that we can deliver, like frequency, like amplitude, for example, that will lead to the most robust effect on the tremor? And one really interesting thing about Cala is very early into the company, Cala opened a clinic on site with a neurologist principal investigator, where we could interact with patients directly who volunteered to participate in clinical trials and really get a good understanding of how well a new feature or new device was working and get their input directly. So that's been a great, of great value for the company. Interestingly, Cala also developed a vertically integrated business model to help support patients through every step of the journey of this with this therapy. So Cala set up services to connect patients with expert physicians via telemedicine to help patients decide what treatments might be right for them. And if a trio was prescribed by the physician, we will receive the prescription directly from physicians and then drop ship the product directly to patient's doorstep as a licensed DME distributor. DME is a durable medical device distributor. And once patients receive the device, we have a virtual patient services and customer success team to help ensure a seamless onboarding experience. And as patients use the device, we can empower them by keeping them informed of their tremor motion data, showing them what impact the device is having on their tremor. So I just want to end here with saying that at Cala, we've really made it our mission to transform the standard of care by developing and delivering effective, first-in-class wearable neuromodulation therapies. And we started with a focus on essential tremor and movement disorders. We're now developing platform therapies to expand our pipeline into other fields of neurology, as well as psychiatry and cardiology. And we really believe it's the right time for these wearable neuromodulation devices due to, as I mentioned before, the innovative advances in neuromodulation, where we can understand the impact of electricity on the nervous system, the developments of miniaturized electronics that allow for body-worn systems, and then the explosion of big data analytics, where we can better understand the essential tremor disease state, and we can get an understanding of what will optimize the therapy for a given patient. So I'll end there. Thank you for your time and for joining the webinar today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alex. Great overview. Appreciate it. We have a couple of questions here. Rena Hale says, very cool technology. Thank you. And then a question from her, from Rena. Can you speak to the therapy session? Do they wear it with a PT after calibration to learn how to use it? Do they wear it all day, all the time, or for periods of time?
Great question. Yeah, so it's really left up to the patient to decide how they want to use the device. Each stimulation session is currently 40 minutes in length. Patients can choose to wear the device all day and deliver stimulation multiple times per day as needed. And alternatively, if they only need it for a certain period of the day when they want when they really need the tremor relief, they can just wear it during that period. So that flexibility is really provided to the patient to figure out how they want to use it.
Okay, thank you. Greg Peterson is asking a question. Hi, Greg. Are there any negative side effects of this stimulation method?
Another great question. So in the big study that we ran, there was a AE rate of 14% where patients were getting skin irritations due to stimulation. And that's something we're actively working to reduce the rate of those skin irritations that occur. This is a common issue that occurs with stimulation delivered through the skin, electrical stimulation. So that is the most common adverse event or side effect, if you will, by far.
Okay, Stefan Madansing is asking a tech question here, followed by a business question. Is the device more effective against high or low frequency tremor? And does it reduce tremor distal to the device only, or are there essential tremor symptoms reduced proximally to the device as well? And are you exploring applications in gait? And finally, his question about the reimbursement for this device.
Okay, so let me try to get to those, and Lars, I may need you to repeat some of the later ones. So the device really only treats peripheral tremor. We are not actually measuring any changes in axial tremor, or which can be things like affecting voice, for example. So really, the tremor relief is obtained on the arm that the device is worn, the arm, wrist, hand area that the device is being worn. Sorry, Lars, can you repeat the
reimbursement?
Oh, reimbursement. We are active right now. It's out-of-pocket pay, and we're actively seeking reimbursement. So stay tuned. And was there any other?
Yeah, there are several questions coming up. I don't think we have time for them all,
Okay.
but there's a theme here on applications to movement, gait, posture.
Yes, around gait and posture. So right now, our device is only used for treatment of tremor, but we are trying to become a sort of movement disorders treatment, and so we are looking at various other symptoms related to movement disorders. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great bridge over to Tom's presentation and RxFunction. Tom's title is essentially the story of RxFunction. And full disclosure there, I am the co-founder and co-inventor of the technology that came out of Boston University for the device that Tom will be talking about, called WalkaSense. And Tom, if you are taking the screen here.
Yep, I am,
there
Lars.
You go.
Hold on, please. Let me put this in. There we go. Let me back up. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think
Okay,
I
good.
see the slides and I can hear you well, so we should be
All
fine.
right. Very good. Thank you. Lars and I talked about what was good to present here, and we discussed calling this the story of RxFunction. I'm Tom Maurizio, by the way. I'm the CEO of RxFunction, and I joined the team in 2017. This story, I'm sure, like many other startup medtech stories, extends back many, many years. How come? All right. So this is a story about creating a new type of neuromodulation for a new disease or a new set of diseases with a brand new technology on a new part of the body. I'm sure to most of you that sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? In truth, it's anything but easy. So this has been, I believe, a real white space effort by Lars and others that preceded us. For one thing, we're using tactile stimulation neuromodulation as opposed to electrical stimulation in a category of movement disorder diseases. We are treating balance deficits instead of the typical pain, tremor, or urgency symptoms that most neuromodulation technologies target. We are also doing this without technology from other medical device platforms to leverage. So we're not using leads technologies, implantable pulse generating technologies, etc. It's all external, all wearable. So as we are addressing balance, mobility, and fall risk in our target population, I think it's important to recognize how large and expensive these problems are, especially the problems of falls in the older population. Neurologic diseases are a leading factor of risk for falls in these patients. And just a couple of statistics worth talking about or mentioning is 1 out of 4 older adults fall each year. And the cost to society and healthcare and the patient directly is over $50 billion annually in the United States. Here's a little history pictorial of RxFunction, and this, Lars can tell this far better than I, but I'm going to attempt this. So this is in fact somebody's life's work. That would be Lars. And the earliest physiology research efforts can sometimes lead to a product idea even before it's technically feasible. So the early research behind our product called Walkasins was basic research done in Boston, where Lars was doing some postdoc work. And it wasn't product research per se. So early and practical prototypes for everyday use began to prove the concept might work. Technology for this kind of product wasn't ready, though, 13 years ago. Eventually, mobile phone technology evolved, and it accelerated the evolution of the building blocks to make this possible. So Lars was able to take this idea he had and turn it into some early concepts and convince the NIH to fund both the development of the technology, but perform some early human clinical research and assess whether this technology might be viable one day. So this led to interest by some early investors. I joined the team in 2017 to lead fundraising efforts and organizing the team to move it forward to commercialization. And we are currently seeking additional sources of capital to build out our business strategy. If you look on the far right, you see a picture of our Walkasins product, which you would wear on both feet at the same time. And it's really composed of two major components. This black foot-shaped device is a flexible pressure sensing technology that you wear in your shoe and you stand on, and it connects to a unit you wear above the ankle. Which is composed of a rechargeable battery, microprocessor, and 4 vibrating actuators that really stimulate the skin using vibratory or haptic technology as opposed to electrical energy. And you put this on in the morning and wear it all day long. That is essentially how the concept is intended to function. What I have for you in this slide is really a video describing what it can do for a patient as part of an early clinical research study Lars was involved with at the Minneapolis VA. This patient has peripheral neuropathy and has numbness in his feet, so he can't feel the ground while he walks. This directly affects his balance, and he is being tested both before and after turning this technology on. I'll activate the video on the left. What you see is because he has to do this test with his eyes closed, that's the intent of the test, and he can't feel the ground beneath his feet, he's lost 2 major sources of balance input. And you can see how bad he walks. After 10 minutes of orientation to the stimulation, just by getting the feel of the device per se, the test is repeated. His eyes again are still closed. And I think what you can see is the physical therapist no longer is guiding him. He walks naturally, normally straight down the hallway along the lines of that blue line. And again, his eyes are closed. And the reason why this is an interesting video is that this patient has a disease called peripheral neuropathy, which is probably the largest neurologic disorder in our country. 20 million Americans are affected by this. And it's caused by a multitude of factors, diabetes being the leading cause of peripheral neuropathy. And out of that 20 million patients, we're specifically targeting patients with severe numbness, who can't feel the ground beneath their feet and have a significant problem with their balance. and are at high risk of falls. And we estimate the total addressable market of that population to be about 5 million patients in the United States. And worldwide, if you go to any country where diabetes is widely prevalent, I could assure you there is a large population of neuropathy in those patients as well. And how Walkeson's works is really to replace that lost nerve function. So the product is called a neuroprosthesis. We're replacing the lost nerve function in your feet with tactile stimulation above your ankle. And in a healthy person, that sensation from the bottom of your feet travels to the brain up the afferent nerve pathways where balance is controlled and maintained. In neuropathy, that information is lost. So we're replacing that with the tactile stimulation above the ankle. And this information, if the patient can feel it, is directly reaching the brain through the same afferent pathways in healthy people. And it's quickly interpreted by the brain. And through the normal efferent pathways down back to the feet and the legs, the brain can control muscles for better gait function. And this appears to do this without consciously thinking about it. It's almost like we're plugging into the channels that currently exist in a healthy person and where that data source has been missing for a while in these patients. So the time to learn how to use this is very quick, and patients can experience immediate benefits. And our clinical data, which I'll get to in a moment, also demonstrates what goes on over the long term. One way of thinking about this technology is that it's a platform technology with product line extension capabilities, but also other neurologic diseases other than neuropathy where patients might benefit. And you see a number of them listed on the lower right-hand side of this disease. Basically, any neurologic disease where gait and balance might be affected, there's a chance that Walkeson's and our neuroprosthesis technology may provide the patient the benefits needed to maintain safer gait and reduce their falls risk. However, those other diseases, there is likely a different mechanism of action than what occurs with neuropathy, where we are attempting to directly replace that lost nerve function. In these other diseases, it's more of a neuro augmentation construct where we are providing additional input to the brain and allowing the patient to strengthen their balance system, even though they still have sensation at the bottom of their feet. We would need to study those populations to expand our labeling, but we do have some anecdotal data represented here at the bottom of the slides for a wide category of different diseases where you see improvements in balance metrics and reduction in fall risk. We decided, though, early on in the development of this technology to focus in a narrow disease of peripheral neuropathy and pursue an inch-wide, mile-deep strategy as our first attempt, given the size of the neuropathy population particularly, and then broaden our research activities from there. From a regulatory standpoint, that inch-wide, mile-deep strategy allowed us to really achieve a regulatory clearance in a very quick way. We can fall into the category of externally assembled lower limb prosthesis, which is a Class 2 exempt category in the eyes of the FDA. Registration is required, but not a submission, review, and clearance strategy like in a traditional 510K. So Walkeson's and RxFunction was listed and registered in late 2018. In these new areas, the sensory augmentation path would require regulatory review by the FDA for each indication, starting as a de novo device. So as we get this business and market built, we will expand our focus and probably pursue de novo indications over time. And this will become a larger area of interest for us in the future. Moving to the state of our clinical evidence, we have a large ongoing trial going on today. It's been presented at numerous neurology conferences and rehabilitation conferences, and are getting ready to submit our first major publication from this study. It's called Walk to Wellness. This data, coupled with some randomized controlled data that was collected at the very beginning of this trial and earlier on in another study that was funded by the NIH, what we're looking at is gait balance measures, gait speed, and fall rates in these populations. And what we're seeing is immediate and sustained improvements and long-term durability of the treatment effect. In addition, we're tracking the falls rates in this population, and what we're seeing is a significant reduction in the risk to patients, as well as a reduction in the rate of falls these patients have after beginning to wear this, and improvements in their gait and balance begins. In addition, patient feedback on the ease of use and how long they're wearing this technology during the day is also being collected, both through polling data from each of the patients, but also from the device itself. Inside each device, we're tracking every step a patient takes, how long they're wearing it, and what their level of activity is during the day. So we're able to match both the polling data plus the data we're collecting from the device. So our Walkison sensory neuroprosthesis, really, the studies we've done have informed our top-level messages about what the benefits of our technology can be for neuropathy, are easy to understand. And there have been many, many opportunities over the last 18 months to expose neurologists, rehab physicians, and physical therapists to these messages, and they're very easy to understand. In addition, we are looking at sort of the key messages targeting 3 different groups from a value proposition standpoint. So for patients, our messages involve improving their balance and mobility and how easy it is to learn and use. For medical providers, it's about offering an option for patients who are easy to identify, where no clinical solution exists today. There is nothing in the market anywhere in the world that can do what Walkisons can do. In addition, identifying those patients for those medical providers is aligned with financial incentives currently provided by Medicare to assess and reduce falls risk. And for the payer community, so that'd be insurance companies, we're addressing a leading cause of costly unmet medical needs, as our data would suggest. So once we got fundraising off the ground, we assembled the team from a cross-section of the medical device community, both in Minnesota and from outside, with deep med tech experience. Here's just a snapshot of our management team and the companies in their background. Together, we have over 100 years of management experience in the medical device community. We laid out a multi-year commercial plan, focusing initially on peripheral neuropathy in the US, with expansion outside the US and into new indications at a later date. Reimbursement is a critical milestone in achieving commercial success with this technology. And what we stepped back and thought through very, very hard was how to begin pursuing reimbursement and where to begin our market development focus and efforts. And what we discovered very early on was that the VA system in the United States already has reimbursement available for new technologies like this. With a large number of eligible patients currently enrolled under the VA healthcare umbrella. Secondly, we knew patients, given the sheer number of them, some of them might be interested in a self-pay option for patients. So we focused our first commercial efforts in the last 12 months, both at the VA and developing a self-pay model for our patients. And that process has taken off in earnest over the last 90 days. Third, our third area of focus is once publication of the Walk to Wellness study is done or is started, we are going to pursue private clinics more aggressively and initiate patient-specific reimbursement efforts with third-party commercial payers, and later on Medicare directly. So here's a little bit of a status report on where we are commercially. We started out with an extremely small sales team of 2 people, really as a way of piloting our efforts and learning about how to be more successful in these different customer segments. So late in the fall, or in the fall of 2019, we took our first 2 large territories and targeted 20 VA centers in those territories. And since that point in time, we've added 2 additional independent reps in the Pacific Northwest, adding 10 more targets. So this is a little bit of a progress report on opening those centers. And since the fall of 2019, in those first 2 territories with 20 targeted accounts, we've opened 9 VAs thus far. So what that means is those Veteran Administration medical centers and their outpatient clinics will pay. They've done a review of our scientific literature, our technology, and the need inside their own centers, and they've approved this for use at the price point we've established. Since I would say the middle of March, when COVID-19 really took off in this country, the VA system has closed down. So progress on opening new accounts since the middle of March has stalled, but we're beginning to see patient volume is starting to flow again at a slow rate at the beginning. And so we anticipate activity to reemerge over the next couple of months. So because of COVID-19, we actually decided we needed to pivot our commercial strategy to focus more on private clinics that have previously expressed interest in our technology. And those clinics needed to demonstrate willingness to consider this technology for patients they might consider to be self-pay candidates. So our tactics evolved completely since middle of March. And today we do a virtual outreach with these new clinical sites. And we've leveraged over 300 sales leads in private clinics that we've accumulated over the last 2 years and targeted 32 initial sites across the US. And in this subsequent 3 months, we've opened 9 private accounts that demonstrate the interest clinicians have for our new technology and where they see a large unmet need and are interested in gaining experience with it. And we're also beginning to see these sites evaluate patients and moving towards self-pay revenue for RxFunction. With that, I'll end this presentation and ask for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tom. There are a couple of questions here. We're a little bit over time here. I apologize for that, but a couple of quick questions from Vinny. Does Walkerson's work for stroke patients?
That's a great question, and I can tell you that our physical therapist community is keenly interested on studying it for use in those patients. I would say this, at this point in time, we have some anecdotal data that would suggest it might be beneficial. But in order to go out and actually demonstrate that, each of these new indications kind of is its own clinical research path. And so we haven't studied it aggressively. And the question would be, in the stroke rehabilitation world, is this technology something you would use in clinic, or is it something a patient would wear chronically? And that would have direct impact on the commercial model you would elect to pursue. So because of peripheral neuropathy being a chronic long-term disabling disease, our focus is on making certain our long-term data supports its use over the long term, and support the pricing and the business model we've established around it.
Another question here, Greg is asking regarding use over time. Does peripheral neuropathy improve? Feeling begins to return to the patient. And if feeling is normal, but the cerebellar ataxia is a diagnosis causing imbalance, might there be an improved gait experience and reduction in related falls?
I'm going to let you answer part of that, Lars. I'll answer the first part. But I think your question was, does sensation return? And the short answer is, for the vast majority of neuropathy patients, it will never return. In the world of chemotherapy and induced neuropathy, once the chemotherapy ends, sensation might return slowly, very slowly, in fact, but it might return. So it may be you would wear this technology for a couple of years or several years. But for diseases like neuropathy, as an example, caused by diabetes or hereditary forms of neuropathy, or Agent Orange exposure, et cetera, the odds are very good you will never get sensation back. So you will rely on this for the rest of your walking life. Lars, regarding the central nervous system, part of the brain, I'll let you try to answer that if possible.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Regarding cerebellar ataxia, I can't say we have any even anecdotal data on that. So that's something that for now is an unknown. We would know that this would provide any patient category with additional information about balance. So it's something that on a therapeutic side, the therapist could try, but it's nothing that we know anything about today. One final question here. There are some questions popping out. Let's see. Someone is asking about share any preliminary clinical results, and also asking about the private pay price. I think we would point to our website where there is preliminary clinical data shared, and just simply go to the RxFunction.com website. There will be additional information there. And the question regarding if the presentation is available somewhere, I'd like to send it to another neurologist professor. And this is from Ute Hilgers Ilmaz. You can follow up with an email with us, and this recording will be available on YouTube for the whole session. We are able to share other parts of this, like other speakers here mentioned, they will be able to share as well. So you can reach out to any of the speakers here regarding these presentations for additional information, and also maybe PowerPoint or a PDF of this. And if there are any other questions.
Let me just add, Lars presented at the AAN, American Academy of Neurology virtual session that was supposed to be in Toronto in May. And that presentation is available online on the AAN website.
One more question here that may be of interest. And if there are questions to the other speakers as well, please, you can submit them here. If we are sort of, I see there's quite a few participants still hanging in here. If you have other questions that we can follow up on, since we may have some time at the end here. Like Gary said, there's open-ended. No one is coming into this room. Like, that's a benefit of a virtual conference, I guess. Let's see here. Do the patients need to put on all the time? That is, do they learn to retain?
So, Lars, I'll answer that or attempt to. The short answer is we don't anticipate a patient wearing this all day. And the reason is you're not going to wear it to bed at night, as an example. So we do encourage long-term use and all-day use, if at all possible. So we have patients who typically wear this from our clinical research 5 to 8 hours a day, some going well beyond that, some going to a shorter duration. And we encourage wearing it every day. The more stimulation you get, the more your brain adapts to it, and probably the more quickly the benefit will be achieved. But we have patients now wearing this couple years, and we do see occasionally when they stop wearing it, the patient does not immediately fall back to the state of their balance at the beginning of their experience. That happens much more slowly. So the good news is if a patient stops wearing it during the day, they still have the ability to ambulate and move around. And from our anecdotal clinical data on this question, it would suggest that their balance does stay improved over where it was at baseline.
There was one question here regarding another device. How much different Walkerson's is from WalkAid? And I can quickly refer to that. WalkAid is a technology you get for treating drop foot, which is electric stimulation of your tibialis anterior muscle. So it's a very different technology. Walkerson's will not, it's a sensory substitution device. It would not help at all against drop foot and vice versa. Let's see, with that, I think we are through the questions and through the presentations. We still have about 60 participants hanging in there, and I appreciate everyone following along this exciting sessions. I enjoyed all the speakers. Thank you very much for your contributions. I know Chandra had to drop off for another meeting. Unless we have other questions coming up from the audience or from our speakers to each other potentially, I would close this session for now, and I know it's going to be available online through YouTube, and a link probably will come up on the website. Gary, if you have any comments on that specifically, you can chime in. If you're still there. Yeah, I see you're still there.
Yes, the video with any luck should be uploaded to YouTube by the end of the day and will be linked on to the website where we saw the listing of this session.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I enjoyed this first virtual wearable technology session in the Design Medical Devices Conference. Hopefully next time we will be able to meet in person as well, but certainly this is a format that I am sure is going to be around and used in other areas as well. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.